Ouch.
All right. We're going to reconvene now, and we are on reports to the board. And before us, we're going to be talking about the official student enrollment for 2015-16 and free and reduced meal rates. Dr. Michael is with us, Mr. Criswell, and Mr. Prue. Welcome.
Thank you, President Brightman, Dr. Wilcox, and members of the board. Today we're here to report on both the official September 30th enrollment, that is the data that is used to calculate our funding for next year, as well as our free and reduced meal data. That data is actually calculated on a different date using October 31st. As we look at just the overall changes in enrollment, not significant changes in enrollment, although we are down a total of 54 students, K to 12. We see a decrease of 18 in the K to 5 enrollment, an increase in in the middle school enrollment, grades 6 through 8 of 29 students, and then a decrease in 9 through 12 enrollment of 69 students. Slight change in our special ed centers. They generally range 75 to 85 students. We don't generally see a significant increase or decrease over time with that. So our pre-K programs changed this year. We had some programs move from half day to whole day. We had some addition of some programs. The net result of that so far is an additional 26 pre-K students. We'd anticipate, I know the board heard about one program that's going to be expanding at Potomac Heights. Those numbers are not part of the 26 addition because it happened after September 30th. And there's some other openings in some of our pre-K programs. So that number will grow and kind of ebb and flow throughout the year as students come and go from those programs. So net for the year, pre-K to 12, officially on September 30th, we're down approximately 28 students. As we look at our trend over time, in about 2000, we started an upward climb for a number of years. Last year, we dropped about 212 students, our first decrease in many, many years. And this year, with the drop of 54 students, K to 12, we're seeing another slight decline. However, 54 students out of over 22,000 students is a very small percentage. And with that, Mr. Criswell is just going to hit some highlights of some of the individual schools.
Good afternoon. I'm just going to briefly go over some of the changes in the elementary schools. I promise I'll be brief. Where you see some schools up and some schools down is a direct relation to the exiting grade, say the exiting 5th grade for elementary schools and the incoming kindergarten. So for instance, at Bester Elementary, they had a small 5th grade exit and a average to larger kindergarten come in, which resulted in a net increase at that facility. One might say, if there's more increases than decreases, did we have more kindergarten students this year? And we did, but just by only a little bit. We have about 9 more kindergarten students this year than we had last year. So what happened, though, was a similarity to last year where we saw pockets where some areas would see a kindergarten that was the same size as the previous year, others would see smaller kindergarten classes in the previous years, and some would see larger. So it makes it very difficult to try to predict where these students are going to show up. But the aggregate number that Ms. Newman presented back in the winter with Public Pathways projections was very close to what she had predicted. So on a whole, the elementary schools are up 8 students. And if you're the young lady that was here from Salem Avenue that enjoyed math, if she's following along now, on the first page, our K through 5 number was down by 18 students, but our pre-K number was up by 26 students. So net overall, our total pre-K through 5 student delta between last year and this year is an additional 8 students. Looking at the middle school enrollment, all the middle schools are pretty much flat or just a little bit up, except for Northern Middle. Northern Middle is kind of a similar situation. The decline is due in part to about 50 student difference based on the exiting 8th grade and the incoming 6th grade class. So that explains some of the difference there. But middle schools as a whole are up about 29 6th through 8th students. Looking at the high schools, Barbara Ingram is at its largest enrollment since opening in 2009. Washington Tech High Worcester County Tech High, excuse me, is also at its highest enrollment over the past couple years and continues to grow. Boonesboro, we saw a bit of a recovery from last year's lowest enrollment that they had recorded in about 20 years, so we saw that as a positive. But high schools on a whole are down by about 69 total students. Moving on to the special center education areas, as Dr. Michael had indicated, they typically range around 80. We saw that again this year with a total number of 84 students. So, Jeff?
Good afternoon. In terms of the free and reduced price meal eligibility enrollment, we are more or less flat. We're down actually about 2%, which is a reduction on this percentage, 0.2%, excuse me, which is a reduction in numbers of students based on the enrollment on October 31st, about 43 students. We had a strong campaign this year using primarily our electronic application form as opposed to the paper form we've used for years. But I think that number, it's too early really to tell. 1 year not being a trend. We've had steady climbs for at least the last 10 years. And it's really too early to tell whether we've hit a bottom, let's say, on the numbers of students that would be eligible and whether we'll plateau and perhaps our farm rate could potentially decline. But it really is too early to tell if there's a trend there.
And with that, that concludes our report. We'll be glad to answer any questions the board might have.
Questions for the team here with us? Have we segregated out the homeless numbers? Do we know possibly where those are falling, up, down, level? Just curious.
Yeah, homeless numbers aren't affecting our overall enrollment. It's more as they, stay in one school while their family may have moved to another area, and we're transporting those students. We can get a number on that. It generally climbs throughout the year. As I recall, last year we were in a 400 to 500 range by the end of the year. So that data changes throughout the year, but so far has not had an effect on increasing or decreasing of enrollment.
Mrs. Harshman.
Which of our schools are overcrowded?
Chad probably can best answer that off the top of his head. Remember, in elementary, we're about to go through a major redistricting. We're hoping that will almost have all of our elementaries at or around 100% capacity. Our goal, of course, in elementary is to be at approximately 90% capacity. Chad, I don't know if you want to list those off. I mean, there's quite a few in total, maybe.
On the elementary school level, McKay Dowd this year just came back up over its state-rated capacity. Of course, it's going to receive some help next year with the redistricting. Fountaindale Elementary, we saw a couple of grade level increases and an increase in the number of magnet students that came into second grade. They kind of went back up a little higher over state-rated capacity this year. Hickory and Lincolnshire Elementary are both just over state-rated capacity. Pangbourne Elementary this year is rated 100% of state-rated capacity, but it will see relief as well next year with the redistricting changes. Sharpsburg Elementary has been over state-rated capacity for a few years. So that pretty much sums up the elementary. The note, this was the first year that we saw Boonesboro Elementary go under state-rated capacity in the past 20 years. So we saw that as a positive. At the middle school level, E. Russell Hicks Middle came in just at 100% of state-rated capacity. And then Barbara Ingram is listed as over state-rated capacity based on the usage and the way the state counts the seats at the University of Maryland, as well as, excuse me, I'm getting my bearings here, South Hagerstown High is at 104% of state-rated capacity this year.
South High's over the rated capacity.
Yes, ma'am.
And Hicks is the only middle school.
This year, yes, ma'am.
Well, that's good.
Thanks.
Questions, comments? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Next up is the excess property discussion update. Dr. Michael is still with us, Dr. Pugh, Mr. Rollins, and Mr. Trotta. Welcome.
Have the team here prepared to answer any questions you might have. The Facilities Committee met several weeks ago and talked about some potential excess property the board might want to consider. The three properties we're just going to share a little bit of information on today: Winter Street Elementary, Conococheague Elementary. With the closing of those two schools at the end of the school year, we'll need to have a decision on what the board direction might be with those two facilities. Then JDC, we've had empty since 2004, and I think it's time to make some type of decision on that property. So just very briefly, the former Job Development Center, it's a site that's located here. A map is located on here. I'm just going to have a little bit of information on the next slide, but the silver dome off to the right lower hand corner is a piece of property that the board deeded to the town of Smithburg to help them out with a water project they had. You can see where we have a water line easement going through the property. The upper part or the lower part of what you're seeing on the screen, where the building's located, probably about 2 acres. It's been kind of flattened off. It's coming down a hill. The road kind of flattens out. We come down a little bit more of a hill. It flattens out to the building and parking lot. Then it drops down a steep hill to a little pump house, and then it drops a grade the rest of the way across the property. Just a little bit of factual information about the building. Built in 71, approximately 16,000 square feet. Total property is about 10 acres. I did mention the easement for the town of Smithburg and the property that was deeded to them. Currently, the heating system, cooling systems there are inoperable, and you'll see some pictures here of windows and doors and some of the conditions that they're in just a second. Again, we have not occupied this building since 2004. We have used it for storage. Just a couple pictures outside of the building. That upper left-hand corner picture, you can see an outside air conditioning unit that's kind of been gutted by someone, I guess, in the community. The picture at the top right, we did remove the asbestos floor tile in that area. It was starting to fragment throughout the building. It really wasn't appropriate even for staff to walk in and out for storage items without that being removed. So just recently, Mr. Mills contracted our low bid contractor to remove the asbestos floor in that area. Lower left is the downstairs. It is a 2-level building. We have encountered a great deal of mold in that lower part. You can see along the wall that gray substance is mold. We did maintain dehumidifiers in that area, but without heat and cooling regulated, it just wasn't enough to prevent mold in that area. And you can see in the lower right, all the doors pretty much look that way. They're delaminating. A lot of the windows have been covered at this point, and there's quite a bit of work that's needed to the building. The next school is Conococheague Elementary. You can kind of see the outline here of the property. Again, we'll review the facts in just a minute. You come in Learning Lane, and the building's off to your right, parking lot area, ball fields on further out into the property. Built in 1960. It's approximately 27,000 square foot building. It is 13 acres. It's a fair size site for an elementary. It does have a state rated capacity right now, about 250 students. It is our second lowest ranked facility in our EFMP that we shared with you earlier this year. Big challenge there, in addition to the condition of the building, we don't have public water. It's on well and septic at this point. Nearest public water and sewers probably a mile away, which doesn't sound that far, but there's a lot of hurdles to get across bringing water and sewer that distance. Semi-open classroom, meaning you walk through a room to walk through a room to walk through a room to get to the last room. Very common for the buildings built during that time period. You can see in the upper left-hand corner, Gemma Cafetorium, which is pretty common in that day. You know, the gymnasium, the cafeteria, and the auditorium are all used in one space. It does have restrooms in each of the classrooms, or majority of the classrooms. You can see that in the upper right-hand corner. They're about maybe 3x4, 3x5. Obviously, don't meet handicap accessibility issues. In this school, I believe the sinks are located out in the kind of the gang hallway as you move through the building. Windows, that girder construction, we don't have insulations in the wall, single pane windows. And you can see in the right-hand corner, a number of years ago, we did like a makeshift effort to try to provide air conditioning for the school and put these mini split systems that you see there at the top, right below the lights, is kind of a makeshift air conditioning effort that we did there a number of years ago. Last site, just for your consideration and thought process, is the Winter Street Elementary site, obviously located between where 40 West Washington Street and Franklin Street divide the two parts of 40. Building in the lower right-hand portion of the property, you can see there's 4 black pieces right in the middle of the property, or 4 portables, and then playground. The property does slope to the one corner of the property out through the grass area there. Information about it: 1953 was its original construction. In 73, they did enclose a library area, almost like a courtyard area in the middle of the building. A little bit larger than Conococheague, a 33,000 square foot building. It is on 3 acres. It's our smallest elementary site, state rated capacity of approximately 300. This is our lowest ranked facility in the county. And then Conococheague would be our second lowest. Before that, Bester was one of our lowest ranked facilities. We've corrected that issue, and next after this list of 3 would be Sharpsburg Elementary. So just some pictures with Winter Street. You can see it kind of is right out against the road on both sides of the building. A little bit different window construction, similar windows, operable windows. Instead of that girder construction, it does have brick below the building. Bathrooms are very similar, just a little bit bigger, maybe about another foot wider to accommodate a sink. You can kind of see what that looks like. And again, a similar Gemma cafetorium setup. As we discussed with the Facilities Committee, the board has a variety of options with these 3 properties. One option would be to land bank the property. Requests from staff would be, we encourage the board or staff or someone to think about what would be the identified use if we chose to land bank any one or all 3 of these properties. Meaning when JDC was abandoned in 2004 without a plan, we've kind of held on to it all this time. Invested money in it, those types of things, even to keep it in the condition it's in. If it was possible to foresee the future at that point, have been best to get rid of it in 2004. Things we can do with the building: we can secure the building, basically mothball the building. Variety of ways to do that. There are some ongoing costs. We wouldn't want to see mold come into the building, so there'd have to be some minimum heat, cooling. You'd have security. You'd have to consider those types of things. Recommendation of staff would be, if we kept any of the facilities, to maintain the property or to hold on to the property, would be to demo the buildings. We think that'd be best in the long term, would be cheapest, would be if the buildings were ever replaced. That would probably be a first step, and we think that would be even approved by the state. If the state were ever to invest any money, that they would see, they would not recommend investing state funds in those buildings as they are. There is some limited lease options if the board chose to keep the properties. I think they'd have to be leased to nonprofits. Our concern there would be, would somebody be willing to pay enough lease on the buildings that WCPS then could maintain cost to keep the buildings going and continue with repairs and upgrades to keep the buildings usable. The other option, of course, is to surplus the buildings. That would be up to the county what would happen to them. The board would vote to return the buildings to the county commissioners for their consideration of what would happen. Again, from a staff standpoint, that would be a cost avoidance from a standpoint of maintaining them, potentially from even demoing the buildings, as possibly as early with the Winter Street Conococheague properties as soon as we move out, which will be immediately after school year ends, probably within a couple of weeks. We'd be ready to hand the keys over to somebody else if that was the board's interest. The facility committee discussed all 3 properties. At that time, based on the 3 members that discussed the properties, they felt, and they may have changed their minds by this point, but the JDC property, the old JDC property, be returned to the county. Winter Street property be returned to the county. Kind of a split decision on Conococheague, on a 2-to-1 kind of consensus, I guess. Maintain the property, but demo the building, stabilize the site. And with that, that's our report. We're thinking we'd like to bring this back to the board. It's tentatively on the agenda for the 17th for your consideration to take action on this. This would help the facilities team to start prepare with whatever that action might be, particularly for Winter Street and Conococheague. And we have instruction represented to answer any questions. Rob, certainly from a facility standpoint. Tony, certainly from a standpoint of process, if there's any process questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Wilcox?
We'll certainly be guided by the board, but as a superintendent, I would recommend that all 3 properties be vacated as soon as possible and then given back to the county through the process that's set in place. I don't think that we should incur demolition costs. I don't think that we should really dilly-dally around with facilities. We should leave that to the county. Part of my rationale there is that while we do have some money budgeted for demolition, I think we should repurpose that money towards our CIP, which is zero funded right now, to invest going forward in facilities that we will use, and then we can let the county, decide whether or not they would like to lease the property or that they would like to invest in the properties. It to me just does not make a lot of sense for us to even land bank these properties. My sense would be, for example, if we land bank the Conococheague school, that's probably not where we would need a new school going forward if, in fact, population began to grow in that direction. We'd probably need a new school somewhere else. So why have that land? The other piece of that, and I think the council would agree, that even if we do the demo work and we stabilize the land, we still have some exposure because it's property that we are to maintain. We would have to cut the grass. We would have to do the other kinds of things to secure that facility, and probably use some security force to look at it if people start to use it for an untoward property. So while I absolutely will be guided by what the facilities committee and the larger board said, I wanted to be sure that the board understood that as your superintendent, I would recommend that we simply get out of the management of those properties if we don't have an educational purpose for it. We've been very careful to look at that, and I think it's safe to say we don't have an educational purpose for any of those properties. So I just wanted to put that out there for the board to consider.
Thank you. And just to add to that, we will be meeting with the county commissioners on the morning of the 17th, and this is on the agenda for that, to discuss that with them, this issue with them as well, with the idea that at our meeting later that evening we could possibly take action on it. So again, it's open for discussion. Ms. Fisher?
Could I hear from someone on the facilities committee your reasons for keeping Conococheague?
Mrs. Williams, as chair, would you like to handle that question?
Quite frankly, I can't recall the discussion for keeping Conococheague. I think there was some discussion about the possibility of growth in that area, in the Clear Spring area in particular, that might require using that in the future. Help me remember, Mrs. Brightman. Do you recall?
That's fine. I think what we were, at that time, we were looking at the opportunity to maybe keep land, and even if that location wasn't the right location at the time of development, that we could certainly possibly sell it and use it to buy land in the correct area, or trade it, or work out some sort of arrangement with a developer in that area. Again, land banking here would have to include, because state funding really likes to have a water and sewer system. So we would have to be sure, and there's no way of knowing at this point, whether that would ever have water, the 1 mile connection that would be needed to do that. So, but the idea that there might be need in that area as the growth moves out there. It was predicted, I think we all remember, how many times did we close Conococheague? 2 or 3 times over the last 20-some years, and every time we went to close it, growth jumped in there, and we backed off of that and kept it open. So that was the thought at the time. Does that ring a bell?
You had mentioned possibly selling it or trading it, but I didn't think the school board was allowed to do that.
Well, it would certainly be going through the county, but
Okay.
the idea is it would be land banked.
Thank you.
Yes, Ms.
And it's about Conococheague also. Is there any future plan for extending water and sewer to the surrounding area of that? In other words, if we land banked this, the same conditions that we have now would be in effect until somebody comes up with the water and sewer. So
That would be correct. I'm not aware, unless Rob's aware of anything. We're not aware of any plans for sewer water to move in that direction in any time in the near future or on any plans that they have. But you are correct. The state would not only look at, public water and sewer, they'd also look for a walkable community. So to Dr. Wilcox's point, let's say on the west side of Hagerstown, there was a large development of some type, even moving towards Clear Spring or something. Would it be feasible that water and sewer would be there, but it would also be feasible to work out a land deal there and make an actual walking community within whatever development might occur, much like Hager Crossing or Westfield development or those types of things. I mean, as you look at those are ideal large communities, a large portion of the school, as Westfield builds out, as Hager's Crossing built out, a large portion of those schools will be from the, within sight of the building. And that would be ideal if something were to happen on that side of Hagerstown.
do we know the number of students who walked to Conococheague?
Probably very limited. We don't have sidewalks. You're walking
I mean,
along
I
the
see
roads.
the houses around, but
Yeah.
you're right. I don't see
Yeah, you pretty much have to-
sidewalks.
You have to live on Learning Lane.
You what?
You'd have to live right on the street that the school's on. Anybody down along National Pike there
Of course, if we kept the
would be picked
land
up, even if they were close
and
by.
build something there, you don't know exactly where it would be built on the land, so it could be a little closer to things, but I don't
But
know.
I think in our transportation policy, we don't really want children walking on roads with speed limits of excess of 45 miles an hour for more than a quarter of a mile.
Oh, yeah.
So
I don't
it's
either.
very limited. Very few walkers to Conococheague would be off the
Okay.
top of my head, if any.
Thank you.
Mr. Rodner.
Just as a point, the closest development even on the books is Powers Estates, and it just sold to somebody else at a seriously reduced price. And in order to start that development, will require water and sewer to come to them. And that site is approximately, as you said, approximately a mile away, obviously up Route 40. And that's the only one. I mean, that's really the only piece of land other than a couple other farms along Greencastle Pike that would even be suitable for development. If you look at Conococheague's site, I'm not sure how many houses you could build on Conococheague. I don't think very many because of the slope and just the
Well,
variety of other things. Plus the
Without water
fact
and sewer, they'd probably limit the site.
to
to
be a
a
minor
handful of
subdivision
houses.
that would be limited. So the land, it's only how many acres? 10 acres, I think? 13? Not sure you would get much out of that. So, and the odds of somebody paying a significant amount of money to bring water and sewer to that site for 5 houses, 6 houses, whatever the case might be, then nobody's going to pay millions of dollars to do that.
Dr. Harkins.
Yes, I tend to think to not land on Conococheague because the things that we've talked about, which are, maybe swap land or maybe, make some sort of deal with the developer, to me, those are all county functions. Those aren't school system functions. The county is responsible for mitigation. And if we provide the land back to them, if they want to hold on to it in case someday they want to engage in some sort of transaction like that's really up to them. But I don't see that as our role. Certainly we have a role in the mitigation process, but it is not a role that involves horse trading and making deals on swapping land. So I think it makes the most sense to turn it back over to the commissioners And I agree with the idea that we don't demo the school, just because that would limit what the commissioners might be able to do with it. I look around the county, and there are former schools that are used for community centers all over the place. There's one in Keedysville where my family took karate for years. Maybe the commissioners would want to do that. Maybe they wouldn't. Maybe they'd, who knows what they might want to do. But if the building's gone, then none of those is an option. So my thought at this point is to turn them all back over to the commissioners as is.
Yes, Ms. Williams.
Of the three of those properties, in my mind, the Winter Street Elementary School has, I think, some potential in terms of future use for us. I think about our thoughts of expanding pre-K programs, and I think about that as because of its location and because of the types of programs that could be offered that would be beneficial to that area of town. I'm just reluctant to let go of that particular site. Of the three, that would be the one that I would least like to see us let go of.
Mrs. Hirschman.
I just wondered why, when we vacate a school building because it is not in good enough shape to use it for a school, some other group moves in and uses it. I know Surrey, thank goodness we didn't dump that one. That would have broken my heart. But anyway, when we left it, we now have children in that building. Broadway now has Mr. Barr's business in it. I'm just wondering why the buildings are too financially too expensive to correct the problems, and yet other entities move in and seem to have no problems.
Well, I don't know if you want to say they have no problem. They've got ongoing costs, or they've accepted the condition of the building is adequate for what their need is. I think after a building served for 50 years, it's kind of our goal to remodel the building, bring it back up to some type of standard. As you look at a building, you might think, okay, it's good for 1 year or 5 years or 10 years yet, but you think about if schools last 40, 50 years going into the future, you have to make those types of decisions. And a lot of buildings have been demoed by other people that have purchased buildings and purchased the site and have demoed the buildings.
I know, but it was just curious because they were our neighborhood schools, and they are still being used, but just not as neighborhood schools. So it seemed strange. Thank you.
Mrs. Fisher.
I believe most of those have undergone really major renovations, and by developers. It's a little bit different when the developer is doing it himself, or the contractor, than somebody from the outside having to hire people to do the major renovations. Like Antietam, for instance, was made into apartments, but he's doing it for himself, the developer, to rent him. So it's his company's cost.
But Surrey isn't, and I don't know.
It was renovated significantly, but it's been many years ago that it was done.
Right, and I know that.
Was,
but
and Mr. Mills has some insight on Surrey that I don't think we'd want to share here, but there apparently still needs a substantial amount of work maybe going forward.
Well, I'm sure it would, but does it cost as much as a new school?
Usually more.
I don't know. That's what I was.
I don't know, and again, if you renovate those spaces or partially renovate them, and maybe they're good again for 10 or 15 years, but what we try to do is renovate things for 50 years going forward. It's kind of like, do you paint the walls in your house, or do you a complete gut of your kitchen, bathrooms, whatever? I mean, it's very different
Well, I know.
expectations.
And sometimes when you renovate, they look unbelievable like poor South Potomac did. So I had to kiss that one goodbye.
Okay, again, this was just a report. We're not making any decision at this time. It's to help inform our discussion with the county commissioners at the joint meeting with them at 10 o'clock on the 17th. There is time, 2 weeks now, if the community has questions about this report, would like to bring anything forward, time for the community to do that, as well as my colleagues, if they have further question of staff, please bring things forward prior to that joint meeting.
And Mrs. Brightman, if I could add, we'll add these as 3 separate motions, one item, but 3 separate motions. Would that be the desire of the
I think
board?
that's probably a good idea.
Okay. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I missed Karen's call. I hope there's nothing wrong.
All right, that moves us to board committee reports. Ms. Greenwald, would you have anything from student government?
Excuse me. Washington County Association of Student Councils next GA is on November 10th at Western Heights Middle School, and I invite all of my colleagues to attend.
Very good, thank you. Mrs. Harshman, CNI?
CNI met at noon on October the 27th in the board conference room, and Dr. Pugh and her team presented information on the program of studies for 2016-2017, which we voted on tonight, and since it has been approved, it will be available online, so anyone can access it.
Thank you. Mrs. Williams, when is your next?
Oh, our next meeting is the last Tuesday in November at 12 o'clock in
24th.
the board conference room. And I'm not sure the date.
The 24th?
24th.
24th? Okay, 24th. Thank you.
Okay, Mrs. Williams, facilities.
Yes, the Facilities Committee met on Tuesday, October 27th at noon at Jonathan Hager Elementary School. There was a tour of the school, and following that, we discussed several topics. We had an update on the Williamsport High School Athletic Multipurpose Room addition. Things are going well there. Good progress is being made, and I think they're looking at a completion date of the 13th of November, perhaps. And there's some work left to do. Let's see, we talked about a study of options. It's being conducted for athletic field improvements at Smithsburg High School and Boonsboro High School. And we talked about some developments. We talked about the King Road Associates' interest that is still there with regard to property in South County. We talked about a development called Harper Park, which is, I believe, near Paradise Church Road. Is that correct? And we talked about the construction cost impacts on Maryland Public Schools. That was a handout. And that was an interesting discussion. I learned a lot about stormwater management and the number of pools we have at schools that I wasn't really aware of. We are meeting on November 24th, that's a Tuesday at noon, and we will be meeting at Williamsport High School. And at that time, we're going to be taking a look at their multipurpose room addition.
Thank you. Mr. Gassford, Finance.
Yes, the Finance Committee will be meeting on November the 24th at 10:30 in the morning in the third floor conference room.
Good, thank you. Mrs. Fisher, Policy Development.
Policy Committee met October 27th. We worked on the 3 policies that were on our agenda today. We did make recommended one minor change to Dr. Wilcox on the regulation that accompanies the athletic programs for students with disabilities. We also took a second look at the table of contents that we are putting forward or offering to the board as a possibility for a handbook. I will point out that you all should have received in your packet a letter from Mr. Trotta, a copy of that outline, and a request to have any suggestions or concerns submitted by November the 6th. That's coming up pretty soon. Also, Ms. Brown was kind enough to do some tabulation for us since we are nearing the end of the year for the committees. And up until October 20th, we had reviewed this year 47 policies, 1 regulation, and 1 exhibit. 3 policies were adopted, 11 were updated, 27 were rescinded, and 6 are still under, or were still under review at that time. 3 of those are the ones we worked on today. In the last 5 years, the policy committee under various memberships has reviewed 193 policies, 12 regulations, 14 exhibits, and 111 of those items were rescinded. So we're chopping away at that policy book as time goes on. We have a meeting scheduled for November 24th and our regular meeting time of 9 o'clock, and tentatively also a meeting on November 16th.
Thank you very much. Mr. Ridenour, HR?
Yes, HR will meet the 28th at 8:45. I forget which room.
28?
Up 3rd floor, one of the conference rooms. I can't remember which one.
28?
24th?
24th, excuse me.
Thank you.
All right. Any additional reports? MABE reports?
2 things real quick.
Yes, sir.
Just want to let those who are still with us on television, I know we ran the reporter right out of the room, but those who are still with us, on November 11th, the school district will be celebrating Veterans Day. We'll be honoring those who have given to this country through their service in the military. We'll also be supporting their families. I hope some of you as board members will be able to attend some of those events. And each year we get some criticism for having school on Veterans Day. I want to assure our veterans and those who support our folks who have served in the armed forces that we believe that it's absolutely the appropriate venue so that we can speak to our young people about the value of service, about the sacrifice that folks have made over time so they could enjoy the opportunity to sit in those desks. So across this district, we will be honoring and celebrating our veterans. And finally, I would like to say that on December 16th, for many of our retirees who are planning to travel, don't leave home for the winter holidays until you have come to our celebration here in this building where we'll be celebrating 150 years as a school district in Maryland. That's December 16th, and I believe it will be from 5 till 7 p.m.
Very good. Thank you. Any additional reports? Then I will finish up for board member comments with just a reminder that we do have a joint meeting on November 17th at 10 in the morning. It'll be at the county office building, and the 3 items will be the CIP, legislative priorities, and the surplus property report that we just finished discussing. Also a reminder that today's meeting will be rebroadcast on Channel 99 on November 5th at 6 p.m. and on November 7th at 1 p.m. I think, Mr. Ridenour, any board member comments?
Nothing at this time.
Mrs. Fisher?
I have nothing.
Gassford?
Yes, I'd just like to say I thoroughly enjoyed Grandparents' Day at my grandchildren's school, Fountaindale. I think there was approximately 300 grandparents that attended that, and the staff was just fantastic. The kids did very well. Also, I'd like to congratulate the bands over this past weekend. Of course, we had Mother's Day Parade, but the bands on Sunday attended competition. South High took in 3A division championship. Women's sport in the 4A took a championship. Boonesport placed 3rd in the 3A, and North also 5th place in 2A. with South High winning the Cadets Award. So Washington County was very well represented in their band competition this past week. So congratulations to all the bands and the directors that put the time and effort into going out to these competitions.
Very good. Thank you. Dr. Hardings?
Just to reemphasize what Dr. Wilcox said about the opportunities for members of the community to participate in Veterans Day activities in our schools. I regret that for the first time since I've been on the board, I won't be able to attend the Clear Spring event because I have a previous travel engagement, but many of the events in many of our schools are very moving and will make you really appreciate what our young people could do and what our veterans have done for all of us. So I encourage anybody out there to attend.
Thank you. Mrs. Williams?
I have nothing at this time. Thank you.
Hirschman?
Just thank you to all our veterans.
Thank you. Additional comments, Ms. Greenwald?
Nothing this time.
All right, I have no comments this evening, and we are at the end of the agenda, and we are adjourned.